So many archetypes have gotten excessive support, only to be nothing more than flat out garbage. Ninjas, Red Eyes, and Archfiends are some of Yu-Gi-Oh's archetypes that look like they were going somewhere, only to end up on piles of bulk eventually. There was another archetype before them that would go through the same strife, and that was the Genex. Genex was an archetype with a unique premise, backed up by some interesting cards involving 3 stages of Genex support. The original Genex, R-Genex, and finally, the head-scratching Genex Ally. So, what caused their downfall and made them terrible? In today's video, we'll be examining Genex and what made them another lackluster group of cards and mechanics. Genex was included in the Dual Terminal series alongside many familiar and hopeful archetypes like Ice Barriers and Flame Veil. However, Genex was introduced in Yu-Gi-Oh's TCG set The Shining Darkness on May 5th, 2010. This set introduced 5 cards, including Genex Controller, a level 3 normal tuner. As bland as it seems, this card was the main focus of the Genex archetype. As to run this deck, you needed Genex Controller to help with plays and make their synchros. Genex Neutron was a level 4 light machine monster that lets you search for a machine type tuner from your deck to your hand during the end phase of the turn that it's normal summoned. Genex Undyne was a level 3 Aqua that, when normal summoned, you can send a water monster from your deck to the graveyard to add a Genex Controller from deck to hand. Genex Searcher was a level 3 machine type monster that lets you special summon a Genex monster with 1500 or less attack if Genex Searcher is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard. They also gave Genex a synchro in the Shining Darkness, Hydro Genex, a level 6 water machine synchro. It requires Genex Controller plus 1 more non-tuner water monsters. And when it destroyed an opponent's monster by battle and sent it to the graveyard, you would gain life points equal to the attack of the destroyed monster. Now, out of all of the cards that continue to see play after Genex is ran off as a bust, Genex Undyne would continue to see competitive play in Mermails, as the card allowed you to set up your graveyard and activate the effects of cards like Atlantean Dragoons, who can grab you any Sea Serpent from your deck to your hand if it's sent to the graveyard to activate a water monster effect, allowing you to grab combo pieces like Neptus and Abyss Megalo. This card was also solid in Master Rule 4 during the Link era, as it could send Crystron Phoenix to the graveyard to grab Genex Controller, generate a token, then use it to make a Link Spider to special summon the Genex Controller to make Halki Fibrax. This card has been a decent one-card start in the format for years, but has the downside of eating up your normal summon to activate its effect. It requires that you have a valid target in your deck to activate its effect, meaning you can't play the card if you don't have Genex Controller in your deck, making it mandatory to play the Garnet and possibly having copies of Genex Undyne useless in your hand due to the cause of having Controller stuck in your hand. Nonetheless, the community decided the risk was worth the reward, and the card still sees moderate play, but mainly in Duel Links. As for the rest of the Genex cards, the first wave was a mixed bag. You had Searchers and Neutron and, well, Searcher, but Genex Undyne didn't fit the deck and was only helpful in making their subpar synchro and just sending Treeborn Frog to the grave as a target for Undyne's cost. Ultimately, the deck wasn't ready for play at the moment. It didn't take long for the next wave of support as Hidden Arsenal 2 came, and the deck got help in the form of 10 new cards. While it's great to see the deck get support, most of the cards were underwhelming, especially with the non-tuner Genex cards. Genex Gaia was a level 3 Earth Rock monster, and if it was destroyed, you could destroy 1 Genex Controller instead. Genex Furnace was a level 5 Pyro Pyro that you could normal summon without tribute if you controlled a Genex Controller. Genex Doctor was a level 3 Dark Spellcaster that would let you pop a Genex Controller to select and destroy 1 card in the field. Genex Blast Fan was a level 3 Wind Spellcaster that lets you special summon a Genex Dark monster from your deck when it's special summoned. Genex Army was a level 6 Earth Machine type that lets you tribute a Genex monster to pop 1 card in the field when you tribute summon it. Genex Turbine was a level 4 machine that gave all Genex monsters 400 attack while you control this face-up card. And Genex Solar was a level 7 light machine that you could normal summon by tributing 1 Genex monster, with a built-in continuous effect that burned your opponent for 500 life points every time a face-up Genex monster you control was sent to the graveyard. Now, there's a lot to break down with this group of cards. While the cards had different attributes allowing you to make the new group of Genex synchros that required additional attributes to make them, these cards had really slow effects. While normal summoning wasn't heavily punished back in the 5Ds era, it wasn't optimal for synchro decks to summon monsters consecutively, 1 turn at a time, and Genex suffered from this problem. The archetype didn't have any way to special summon monsters, and most of their effects, like Army and Furnace, needed multiple monsters on the field to do anything. It also didn't help that some of their monsters needed other monsters on the field to activate their effects, especially cards like Genex Gaia and Genex Doctor, who needed to destroy Genex Controller to activate their effects. That caused significant setbacks and made maintaining 2+ monsters on the field hard. Sometimes this was avoidable by using cards like the Tricky and Summoner Monk to help get extra bodies on the board, or use double summon to get an additional normal summon. Still, none of these options were searchable cards and needed to be seen heavily to make the deck work. The tuners were Genex Recycled and Genex Spare. Genex Recycled was a level 1 Dark Machine tuner with 200 attack and 400 defense. Once per turn, you could target 1 Genex monster in your graveyard, and until the end phase, you could treat the name of Genex Recycled as that monster. Genex Spare was a level 3 Dark Machine monster with 800 attack and 1200 defense. Once per turn, if you controlled a Genex monster, you could treat this card as Genex Controller. These cards were superb support for the archetype, as both could be used in place of Genex Controller if you didn't access it at the moment, taking pressure off of you to have to dig through your deck to get one. It also helps that Genex Recycled could be searched by 1-for-1 and be used as a machine duplication target. The only downside of Recycled was also because it was level 1, meaning you'd probably need more material to make your synchro plays. All that aside, the tuners alleviated the need to have Genex Controller to start your plays immediately. To round out the support from Hidden Arsenal 2, we have the 3 synchros that were introduced, and they all needed Genex Controller synchro materials and a specific attribute. Thermal Genex needed a fire monster, Windmill Genex required a wind monster, and Yugioh Genex required earth. Thermal Genex gains 200 attack for each fire monster in your graveyard, and when it destroys a monster by battle, it inflicts 200 damage per opponent for each Genex monster in your graveyard. Yugioh Genex would let you switch this monster's attack and defense if you controlled a level 4 or lower Genex monster in the field once per turn. Windmill Genex would gain 300 attack and defense for every set spell and trap card in the field, and you can send a card from your hand to the graveyard to pop one set spell or trap card. Windmill was the only one out of the 3 that saw some kind of play, as it was a solid spell and trap card removal. The others weren't played because there were simply better options to play, even at the generic level. Yugioh Genex was abysmal to play when you had better options for the extra deck, like Brionic, who was the same level but had more impactful effects on the game. In summary, their new support wasn't helpful. Slow mechanics and struggles with building board presence hindered Genex from keeping up with the meta swarmed by Blackwings, Infernities, and X-Sabers. Also, most Hidden Arsenal archetypes weren't given any spell and trap card support, and Genex was no exception. However, the wave of support was still coming in, and there was more Genex support in Dual Terminal, meaning there was still hope for the archetype to get better. Duelist Revolution would be the next time Genex would get support in the form of 2 new cards. Genex Worker was a level 3 wind machine. It had 1200 attack and defense, and you could tribute to special summon a Genex monster from your hand. Genex Power Planner was a level 1 light spellcaster that lets you add a level 3 Genex effect monster from your deck to your hand on normal summon. These 2 cards were immediate staples in the deck. Genex Worker gave Genex some sort of special summoning support and combined well with Genex Blast Fan, whose trigger effect activates on special summon, allowing you to summon a Genex monster from your deck. Genex now had a way to access synchro summoning on turn 1. They also gained another searcher in Genex Power Planner, though it only searches Genex effect monsters, which cuts off your access to Genex Controller. Nonetheless, they were welcomed additions to the deck and helped improve the deck in the form of an extender and more searching power. In November of 2010, Starstrike Blast was announced, and 2 new cards were revealed for Genex. Genex Ally Axel was a level 8 Synchro Machine monster. It had 2600 attack and 2000 defense, and once per turn you could discard 1 card from your hand to select and special summon a level 4 machine monster from your graveyard. Its attack would be doubled, but it's removed from the field during the end phase and couldn't attack directly. Genex Ally Duradark was a level 4 Dark Machine monster with 1800 attack and 200 defense. Once per turn, you could select 1 face-up attack position monster with the same attribute as Duradark and destroy it, but it couldn't attack when you activate the effect. Out of both cards, surprisingly, Genex Ally Duradark had a different impact on not only Genex, but the meta itself. With Duradark being a dark monster, it could pop any dark monster in the field regardless of level, type, or attack power. Since Dark is one of Yu-Gi-Oh's most supported attributes, this card at the time could take out almost every dark monster in the game. It was even more impactful during the Dragon Rulers era, since it could take out monsters like Evilsworn Ophion, whose continuous effect stopped the special summoning level 5 or higher monsters. It could also add an Infestation spell or trap card from the deck to the hand. The favorite target for Evilsworn players was Infestation Pandemic, a quick play spell that made Elsewhere monsters unaffected by card, spell, and trap card effects. With that being the case, decks would side deck this card for the Evilsworn matchup to win against it. On top of these cards being added to the Genex archetype, there would also be the first wave of Genex's sub-archetype, Genex Ally, to be introduced to the TCG. More came along later down the road, but in the meanwhile, another sub-archetype of Genex would be introduced in Hidden Arsenal 3. R-Genex was introduced in Hidden Arsenal 3. 9 new cards were given to the Genex, with 7 main deck monsters and 2 synchros. 3 R-Genex monsters were searchers. R-Genex Turbo, R-Genex Magma, and R-Genex Crusher all had searching effects when normal summoned. R-Genex Turbo added 1 level 1 Genex monster from deck to hand. Magma added 2 R-Genex monsters from deck to hand, and R-Genex Crusher grabbed 1 level 4 R-Genex monster from deck to hand. While more searchers were welcomed, they still required a normal summon to search, effectively meaning your turn would be normal summoning 1 searcher and then passing turn, which isn't efficient for a deck that has trouble putting monsters on board. R-Genex Accelerator was a level 4 wind monster that allowed you to special summon any Genex monster added from your deck to your hand. This effect wasn't once per turn either. If you could add Genex monsters from your deck to your hand, you could special sub them to the field. R-Genex Ultimatum was a level 4 Earth Machine monster. Whenever it's destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can select up to 2 Genex monsters from your graveyard to add them back to your hand, giving your deck a card that recycles essential cards. The 2 new tuners they received were R-Genex Overseer and R-Genex Oracle. R-Genex Overseer was a level 2 tuner that, when normal summoned, you get to special summon a level 3 or lower Genex monster from your hand. R-Genex Oracle was a level 1 dark tuner that could be special summoned from the hand when added to your hand from the deck, but it couldn't be used as a synchro material except for a Genex synchro. Both cards were the type of extenders needed in this deck, as you had more options to get 2+ monsters in the field and get your turn 1 synchro. Finally, 2 new synchros were to round out the further support from Hidden Arsenal 3. Vindicate R-Genex was a level 8 synchro that needed 1 Genex tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner win monsters. Your opponent couldn't target this card for attacks, and when it would destroy a monster by battle, you get to add 1 Genex monster from your deck to your hand. Locomotion R-Genex was a level 9 dark synchro that needed 1 Genex tuner monster and 1 or more non-tuner dark monsters. When you synchro summoned it, you get to take control of 1 face-up monster at the highest level. As good as these cards were, they still didn't trump plain generic synchros. Any player would just choose Stardust or even Mistworm over Locomotion and Vindicate. It also doesn't change the fact that the Genex got an enormous amount of support 3 sets in a row and still had no impact on the meta as a whole. Deck had the same underlying problems, where they were either poorly addressed or just not addressed at all. The deck still moved at a snail's pace regardless of the search power gained from every set. The synchros didn't see any play as they required too much to make or just didn't have effects that beat out the generic synchros available, and still no spell and trap card support to help an archetype just filled with monsters. So, what was Konami's solution to address the inconsistencies? Easy, you just keep printing monsters. In 2011, Genex got more support in the form of the Genex Ally. Unlike the rest of the Genex series, Genex Ally was a group of dark machine monsters with more effects involving attribute and board control. Genex Bellflame gained a Genex counter every time a monster you control is sent to the graveyard. It could gain 300 attack for each Genex counter, and when it was removed from the field, it would burn your opponent for 300 damage, equal to the number of counters on the card. Genex Ally Power Cell gave all of the monsters that control the same attribute as this card 500 attack. Genex Ally Crusher, once per turn, lets you select 1 card your opponent controls and destroy it when a monster is normal summoned to your side of the field with the same attribute as Crusher. Genex Ally Reliever was level 5 that could be special summoned from your hand when you negate the activation of a spell, monster, or trap card. Genex Ally Changer was level 3 that lets you select 1 monster in the field, select 1 attribute, and then change that monster to the select attribute until the end phase. Genex Ally Chemister was a level 2 that did the same thing as Changer, but only to the Genex monster. The change isn't until the end phase and can be activated on either player's turn. Genex Ally Volcanon lets you send 1 Fire Genex monster from your hand to the graveyard to select and destroy 1 face-up card on your opponent's side of the field, and inflict damage to your opponent equal to the level of the destroyed monster times 400. Genex Remote was a tuner that allowed you to target 1 tuner monster on the field and treat its name as Genex Controller until the end phase. Finally, Genex Ally Solid is a level 2 monster that lets you send a face-up Water Genex monster on your field to the graveyard to draw 2 cards. As you can guess, most of these cards were unplayable. They weren't extenders, nor did they help in terms of collective effects. Attribute manipulation was never a strong mechanic in Yu-Gi-Oh! To waste your summons on monsters just to change an attribute of another monster was a waste. Cards like Solid and Volcanon also didn't benefit from the deck because they needed a specific type of Genex to activate their effects. The only Genex Ally monster that saw a light bit of play were Crusher, who, like Do or Dark, could pop a card on your opponent's side of the field when you normal summon a monster with the same attribute, and Remote, who can make any monster become Genex Controller. Though these cards were disappointing, 1 Genex tuner would become a prevalent card in the early TCG meta. Genex Ally Birdman was a level 3 dark tuner with 1400 attack. You could return 1 face-up monster in the field to special summon Birdman from your hand, but it was banished when it leaves the field. It also gained 500 attack, but the monster return was a wind monster. Birdman was a fantastic card due to the ability to special summon itself and bounce back cards to your hand to let you reuse them next turn. The most nutty part about why Birdman was so dominant was because bouncing a monster back to your hand was a cost for its effect. This is what made it a problematic FTK card and not just 1, but 2 FTKs that saw play. The Divine Wind FTK involving Ancient Fairy Dragon and Blaze Phoenix, and the 3-card Gallus FTK, where you would simply normal summon Koiki Mirror Doom, use Gallus' effect to reveal a card at the top of your deck, and if it was a monster, burn your opponent for its level times 200. Send it to the graveyard and then special summon Gallus. Then you would use Birdman's effect to special summon it by returning Gallus. But due to Koiki Mirror Doom negating the effects of all light and dark monsters, Birdman can't special summon itself, which you actually want. Since Birdman isn't once per turn, you could just special summon Gallus again, burn your opponent, use Birdman's effect to bring it back in an endless, unstoppable loop. This card was no slouch outside of FTKs either. It saw tons of play with agents, as Agent of Creation Venus, 2 Mystic Shine Balls, and Birdman was a 1-turn Trishula. Unsurprisingly, the card was limited in 2013, serving a 10-year slap on the wrist before being brought back into TCG at full power in June of 2023, which was very recently. To round out the support are 2 new synchro monsters. Genex Ally Triarm was a level 6 synchro that required a Genex controller plus 1 or more non-tuners to synchro summon. Depending on what non-tuner materials you used, it would gain specific effects. Using wind, you would send 1 random card from your opponent's hand to the graveyard. Water would let you select 1 spell trap card on the field and destroy it, and dark would allow you to choose 1 light monster in the field and destroy it. Genex Triforce is a level 7 synchro monster that needed a Genex tuner plus 1 or more non-tuners to be summoned, and its effects also depended on the non-tuner required materials. If Earth, your opponent can't activate spells and traps during the damage step when it attacks. If Fire, inflict burn damage to your opponent equal to the attack of the monster it destroys by battle. And if Light, you could select a light monster in your graveyard and special summon it face down once per turn. Undoubtedly, these were the best of all the Genex synchros. The requirements weren't restrictive and allowed you to use multiple materials to get various effects for Triforce and Triarms. Even with one of the game's most potent tuners in the palm of their hand and 2 playable synchros on the archetype, Genex just didn't take off, which is a tragic realization for one of the most supported hidden arsenal archetypes. The support was mediocre, putting so many normal monsters inside a deck designed for making different levels of synchros and no spell and trap card support, and the limited amount of special summon extenders was a recipe for failure. Outside of Genex Triarm and Triforce, the synchros demanded too many resources to make, and the 3 sub-archetypes all had different gimmicks and mechanics that didn't go together cohesively. If Genex proves anything, it's the fact that not all heavily supported archetypes will be good archetypes. Currently, Genex decks are swimming in the boxes of bulk, and are probably being used in Master Duel by 5 players. Hopefully, Konami gives Genex the proper support it needs. But until then, it will be remembered as another archetype used for an excellent video on failed cards in the Mechanic series.